Good evening, listeners.
Josh, there's no time. There's no time in pod space.
In this swirling miasma in which this is recorded, there's no beginnings, no ends, no night, no day.
Yeah. We don't want to be one of those podcasts where you can pinpoint the exact moment this was recorded or released. We want this to last indefinitely, just like the movies that we watched this week are going to last through the history of time.
No, I agree that I think it's not too early to begin existential musings over the timelessness of this podcast. Like, we're probably, right in the zone to get into our legacy,
Yeah.
Now that we've established ourselves, it's really about legacy building now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that the whole time.
Okay, so let's do the intro, but this time we'll do the timeless version, and the listeners will be less confused and less, bound to the mortal sphere in which this was created, but rather that, the echoing abyss of eternity.
Right. And then we can, have a director's cut with the other one where you said things.
One wonders how Dan Boyle might have handled this episode of The Real Deal with Josh and Charles. Because, hi, it's me. I'm Josh, and I'm joined as ever by my wonderful co-host, Charles. Hi, Charles.
Hi.
Yes. Wow. Charles, in talking about timelessness and legacy, one is reminded of maybe the greatest man of all. The man, he saw a computer and he said, you know what? If it's nice, not like in science fiction, people will buy it. And what if it's easy to use and it's Steve Jobs? And we watched 2 movies about Steve Jobs this week, and one was good and the other was better. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know which one you're referring to as which, but I would agree with that.
We're going to play a classic game of Jobs or Steve Jobs. I know this has been a sort of cocktail party classic for the last few years where, now that we finally have 2 Steve Jobs biopics to compare, I think when you're sitting around with your friends and having a Pinot Grigio and talking about how the stock market is and about the works of Kierkegaard, frequently those conversations steer into which Steve Jobs movie was better. The one with Ashton Kutcher, aka Kelso from that 70s show, or the other one with some European man and the guy from West Wing who wrote it.
I like this game. Are we going to play it the whole time?
Let's play it the whole time. Jobs or Steve Jobs?
I know this.
Classic game.
Oh, wait, there's a question, too. I thought that was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, here's the question is, which one did you like better? Stobbs or Steve Jobs?
I like Steve Jobs better.
Okay, so you're going to come out from the sort of I've got money and I went to college standpoint of liking the financial bomb written by college boy Aaron Sorkin and directed by some British man. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the American flag and salute the Ashton Kutcher-driven Jobs. 2 movies that about the same topic that could not conceivably be more different. There's maybe not 2 movies ever made that are less similar than Jobs and Steve Jobs that are ostensibly about the same person, making this week a wonderful week for me. I loved these 2 movies.
It was a fun, definitely a fun comparison. It was, because I was surprised. I figured they would go farther into his story, even maybe capture how his dying affected his life. But no, they actually both stopped at pretty similar moments, and they sort of started at similar moments too. So I thought that it was a comparison. They did a great job to let me not have to worry about what they included in his life and really just focus on what we had, because they pretty much covered the same topics, but very differently.
They pretty much did. Yeah. I would say the Ashton Kutcher Jobs in this tried and true television movie approach flogs out this dude's life story in the most uncomplicated possible way, where everything happens in a linear manner and is actively explained by every character in the movie during every scene of the film. There is no subtlety as to what kind of person he is or what is going on in the movie at any point, because the characters will tell you exactly what is happening.
So let's stop there and just focus on, what do you think I actually want to watch the casting commentating track for this movie. I want to know, did they really just try to find people that they thought would look like the person? I hate that fucking shit. When did you watch to the end credits?
Of Jobs?
Of Jobs.
I watched certainly to the end. What was there, like a disclaimer at the end?
No, but they do that thing where they like show a picture of the actor and then show a picture of
Oh,
the
yeah.
real person. It's like, look how close they are, as though that's all we should be caring
No,
about.
I think that's a good way to end a movie by saying, pretty close, right? Huh? Pretty close. Not so bad.
That's like the casting director was the king of this movie, and they didn't give a shit about the performances, really. They just wanted us to make sure we could recognize them in like a cast lineup and say, oh, that's Steve Wozniak, and that's Steve Jobs, and that's
Hey,
whatever.
for the record, Ashton Kutcher did sort of kind of almost look like Steve Jobs, which is probably the thing that we can all take away, the best thing we can take away from the movie about Ashton Kutcher's performance, that he did kind of look like Steve Jobs. Though this was a delightful movie because it's described as a tour de force performance, which basically means that the actor was pretty sure he was killing it the whole time. And you watch this movie and Ashton Kutcher seems like he is just like the king of shit mountain. He feels like he is just on his way to that Oscar and he can feel that golden man right in his hands. Yeah, there is not a moment in this movie where I thought that Ashton Kutcher did not think he was actually Steve Jobs.
Yes, that is so true. I think the best we can say about his performance is that he adequately convinced us that he thought he was Steve Jobs. But yeah, he never actually became Steve Jobs. And actually, it made it funnier for me because I don't know if this is intentional, but Siri autocorrects Kutcher for me into Kitchen. So the whole movie, I was just thinking about Ashton Kutcher, and I just couldn't get rid of it. It made his performance even better.
Where to start with this movie? They decide to start in medias res, which is a fancy man term for we jump towards the end of Steve Jobs' life for the now iconic iPod presentation, featuring an Ashton Kutcher wearing old Steve Jobs makeup, so ridiculous. And his performance is so smug and so self-assured, coupled with the worst old guy makeup I've ever seen in a movie. It's a real barn burner way to kick open the movie by taking one of the most iconic moments in tech history and rendering it so sloppily, and it's delightful. It's a movie where every time Steve Jobs is talking, and this is barely a joke, everyone is smiling and nodding.
Yeah, and it's just standing around watching. It's like every time he's talking, there's always at least 5 people who are there just to nod and laugh and clap. It was a weird way to make a movie where pretty much every scene where he says something longer than 2 lines is given as like a weird little speech, as though his life was a series of whatever he did, those like tech release announcements. It was like a really dumb, as though that was the editor or the writer was like, oh, we only really know Steve Jobs through his little things we see on TV, so I guess that's the only way this man talked. It was a really literal way to recreate a person's life.
That's very interesting. You're right. They take all those presentations and then adapt that into the blueprint for everything he ever did, which is hilarious. And I gotta say, the end of the movie, in the sort of frothing, ridiculous, totally unfettered worship of Steve Jobs that frankly both movies presented, they actually have Steve Jobs record the rebels, weirdos, geniuses, like that fucking Mac ad. They actually have Steve Jobs himself do the voiceover for it at the end and then turn to camera and go, was that good? Which is it's
I
an
couldn't
impressive
tell what
movie.
that was.
Yeah, it's
was that actually like some cry for help from Ashton Kutcher? I don't think so, because the rest of the movie he just looked like he was enjoying it so much, but it was such a fourth wall breaking, look at what we're doing here. I was cracking up during this movie. It was hilarious.
That shit was straight rhetorical, Charles. He 100% was saying, "Is that good?" As if to say, Ashton Kutcher fucking killed it.
Did he get nominated?
Yeah, baffling critics and fans alike. I don't think Ashton Kutcher was in contention for one of them little gold statues that you and I have knocking around the old abode. Disclaimer, neither Charles nor I have won an Oscar for anything.
Not yet.
Nor, to my knowledge, been awarded much beyond participation awards for almost anything.
Yeah, no, but I mean, Danny Boyle wouldn't that be great if he made he and Sorkin teamed up again to make a real deal movie? And really just capture the heart of what we have here?
I know we started this episode by sort of doing a kind of self-reflective exercise by asking ourselves, how will we be remembered for this? Because you watch two biopics about the same person in a row, and you're like, when they make,
Can't help but think that.
yeah, the inevitable, biopic about this creative journey. And I just want to go ahead and quote one of my favorite bands, The Grateful Dead. What a long, strange trip it's been.
So who would play me in The Real Deal?
I would, look, let's just get this out of the way. Obviously, a Seth Rogen for me, okay? Jewish.
I was going to say that.
Hairy,
yeah.
I'm sort of affable, but also kind of an asshole. Let's get Seth in here. Because,
Is he there?
no, he's not here. I didn't mean that
Oh,
literally.
I thought that was like a tease to interview someone other than us. No?
No, I would definitely lead this episode with the Seth Rogen interview if we had gotten that. But no, his representatives have still not responded to me on Twitter.
So, okay, we got, as always, you talk about yourself a lot. So, but who would be, who am I? Who's going to play the me?
I'm going to say this, and you're going to just have to, hear me out. Anne Hathaway.
That is creepy. I thought you were going to say that.
You're both thin brunettes, and I think she has proven that she has the kind of range that, throw on a little dusting of stubble and some fucking glasses or whatever, and, put on a superior than thou attitude and drive a car with a stick shift, and, pretty much you.
I like it. And we can Batman suit or whatever she had. Was she the Batman? No,
she wasn't the Batman. In Christopher Nolan's unimpeachable classic, The Dark Knight Rises, hey, Robin, that's a nice name. You should go by the name Robin because you've been Robin the whole movie, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Yes, she played Catwoman. Catwoman was Anne Hathaway. And spoiler alert, she ends up with Batman in Italy at the end because Alfred was right from earlier in the movie about what would happen to Batman. He survives the nuclear bomb.
So Seth Rogen.
Yes, it's a Seth Rogen, Anne Hathaway film where they meet at a class in liberal arts college and then spend years arguing. Yeah,
I like it. We should write this and pitch it.
Yeah, I'll have my people talk to your people. We'll do a lunch maybe, and we'll I'll definitely consider it.
I don't have any people.
I've got a lot in the pipeline right now, so I would have to clear some space to make this happen. I'm not against it. I would just not to jump ships too quickly here from Jobs to Steve Jobs, but I would like an Aaron Sorkin to write a movie where he writes Aaron Sorkin yelling ideas about my life. That would be really great to have Aaron Sorkin insert his insipid observations about great men into our narratives. That would be really wonderful. I did not like Steve Jobs. It was not a very good movie. It just didn't work.
You didn't like the new one?
The Danny Boyle, Aaron Sorkin joint. Just a movie that in its third act picked up some steam, but a curiously misjudged film that put a lot of weight on some very not compelling storylines. And talk about Aaron Sorkin collapsing into a two-dimensional portrait of Aaron Sorkin. You could plug any human into an Aaron Sorkin script, and it would just be Aaron Sorkining the entire Aaron Sorkin time.
I think, I liked it better than they're very different, and Ashton Kutcher's one was fun in a lot of ways, but not in any meaningful ways. If I hadn't seen whatever he did, the other two that he did recently, Moneyball,
Social Network, and Moneyball,
and so essentially this is I would just say this is not even a trilogy. It's just him remaking the same movie over and over again about a shitty genius that has regrets about people that he should be caring about more. The same stories over and over again about Zuckerberg and Baseball Man and Jobs. It's just about people that are trying to do something else, and then they realize at the end that they should have been loving somebody rather than treating them all like shit. And I think it does it. I think he's still doing it well, but it is sort of, I wish I could hear him talk about something else.
Yeah, it was so hard to give a shit about the character Steve Jobs and Steve Jobs, which is not a good thing in a movie called Steve Jobs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I disagree. I just think for me it was weak because I've already sort of heard this from him before, but I still think that, first of all, I loved the way that he told the story. I thought that was a really nice way to approach it. It felt like I think one thing as a writer, like I am,
Oh boy.
shut the fuck up. When you're telling a story,
get a book, everybody. Yeah. Okay. When you're telling a story.
When you're telling a story, having a sense of time and place is really important. And when you have a biopic like this, where it spans 20 years, 30 years, you oftentimes you lose that sense, and you're essentially just like doing the hits. Here's this scene, here's this scene, here's this scene. Aaron Sorkin does a wonderful job of creating a specific time. And he does go back and tell other elements through dialogue, but we're fucking locked in on each of these 3 moments in his life. And I think it was very effective in broadening this person, but we felt very focused too, and we really just lived in 3 moments. I thought it was very good. I really like this movie, actually. I think it's, as I said, the only downfall for me was that it's just sort of a rehash of his old ideas, but for me, it was still a very effective way to get into a character. Not saying Steve Jobs. I don't think this really portrayed Steve Jobs' life all that well, but I think it was a good character study.
You know, I'm not going to argue with that. I think the third act kind of like brought a desperately needed sense of stake into the movie, which I enjoyed. And to clarify for our listeners, the film takes a look at 3 moments in Steve Jobs' life. 1978, or I want to say 1988 and 1998. Is that close?
No, it was
1984. 88.
1990 something, or 80 something, and 1990 something. I don't care.
Yeah. So, well, let's get this out of the way. Danny Boyle loves crowd shots. I think the only way Danny Boyle gets off anymore is by having hundreds of extras do his bidding. Because, man, there's a lot of crowd shots. When the crowd is doing the wave in anticipation of Steve Jobs speaking, it was hard to not laugh a little bit, where I was like, okay, I get it, Danny. When you say do something,
pretty unfair.
All those people just jump. Because you're Dan Boyle.
I guess
Slumdog
so, but I think
millionaire.
I guess you're right. I think we have 2 voices here. We have Aaron Sorkin, who does a great job of having 5 characters that are the main focus, and we really don't even see anyone else, like in The West Wing and his other movies. And then there is Danny Boyle, where he's now just adding just hundreds of people into the scene. And I think for me, the Sorkin voice was much stronger in that. I didn't really ever feel overwhelmed by the crowd. I thought they were just there to show what was happening on the other side.
I felt overwhelmed by Danny Boyle's horrible music cues. Man, this movie had way too much music in it. All these
Which one had the worst, though? You think?
Oh, wow.
First, do you think
Jobs leans heavily on the rock and roll spirit of a 70s Steve Jobs, and it is pretty stupid. Wow. Lots of songs about freedom and spiritedness, and man, that not great. Not great, Jobs. Not a good one. Man, before we get too deep into this, I want to go back and talk about the Jobs acid trip montage.
Wait, which one?
The acid trip montage in the beginning
of
Jobs.
Oh my God.
Let me tell you a little director secret as a man who's never made a movie in his life. You want to get
taken a lot of acid, probably.
Well, I do enjoy taking acid, but my 2 loves of film and LSD combine in Jobs, and you really want to get that first drug montage about 5 or 10 minutes into the movie.
It's so good.
That's the right time to get into that. I want to talk about the best moment in all of Jobs, where Steve Jobs, as portrayed by the effortless thespian Ashton Kutcher of Kelso fame, he meets this young woman who I believe is an actress in The Wonderful Silicon Valley, a theme of her career, starring in excellent series about the tech world. But she's like doing calligraphy and like falls in love with the rugged charm of a bearded Jesus-like Ashton Kutcher, and they fuck because, like, come on, you're not gonna hit that. And she's
would that have worked on you? If
someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I like your calligraphy. Would I have sex with them?" Yeah, probably.
No, you missed the best part where he peered through a tree at you. That was
that's
just
true.
Fucking
that was
beautiful.
Horrifying.
He's like, yeah. What is that? Like, what the fuck do you think it is? It's homework. Jesus.
Dipshit, you're on a college campus, Kutcher. Kitchen. Look, Kitchen. Anyway, so Kitch seduces this woman, and they sleep together. It's super hot, and he's like, I gotta go Steve Jobs some shit. And she's like, do you want some acid? And he's like, yes I do. And he goes, do you mind if I take a couple? For me and my friend. pause. That's called a beat in actor terms. Then he goes, and my girlfriend.
Oh.
And she's like, oh, fuck, I just fucked a dude with a girlfriend. And like the subtext of the scene is that Steve Jobs doesn't think about people very much. It's a great movie. Anyways, so they take the acid in a random California field, and he's like, man, I can't believe I was adopted. And his friend's like, bro, don't bring that shit up. That's a downer for my sweet drug trip. And he goes, sorry that my life is ruining your trip, dog. And it is so good. It's
There's really no. You have to watch this, even though we've told you exactly what happened. You still have to watch it. It's incredible.
You really. There's actually scenes of him hearing Shostak, like hearing some kind of classical music in Rachmaninoff, I think, while like dancing through tall grass in a field, while scenes of him innovating, are synced up with him like tripping his dick off in this field. It is so good. I had more unbridled joy watching Jobs than any moment in Steve Jobs, because that shit was gold. Oh my God.
Who is the professor character that comes out of nowhere and takes him aside?
James
and
Woods.
Gives him yes.
James fucking Woods. I want to point out that James Woods, Matthew Modine, that other guy from Veep who I enjoy, just a great lineup of character actors in Jobs. Almost everyone who's not Ashton Kutcher is actually not terrible at acting in this movie, and still are beaten into a bloody pulp by a script that truly, I can only imagine getting those notes and being like, God damn it, here we go. Like an extra snort of a whiskey on your way to set that day to get through your scene where you're like, but Steve Jobs, you need to be nicer to people, even though you're such a genius, which is every scene of the movie.
Oof.
Jobs.
Who played Steve Wozniak? Because he was not good. That guy was awful.
Josh Gad. Josh Gad of Book of Mormon fame. That stupid ass musical that South Park guys did.
Oh, yeah.
In the pantheon of bad fake facial hair, Josh Gad as Steve Wozniak looks insane. Like the beard thing they slap on him it is the least convincing facial hair I've ever seen in a movie. I'm going to go ahead and put my money.
Old werewolf makeup.
You can practically see them like pasting it onto his face moments before pushing him on set.
That guy was funny. I love that guy.
He sure was.
But yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about a few scenes where they like his adoption, and I just think it was really funny because the both movies cover a lot of the same topics, but it was just hilarious watching, I think a good screenwriter cover these topics, and then watching a shitty movie cover them, and like the way you're talking about where they're on drugs, and he's like, just, oh man, being adopted is ruining a drug trip, and then how Aaron Sorkin sort of brought it up and mused about it. I just thought it was really funny the way they made these scenes, like the whole when they were coming up with the Apple name. Like, well, that didn't need to be a fucking scene in the movie. Was it supposed to be funny?
I think people like that in biopics.
Yeah, exactly.
Where
it's like gotta hit the stuff. We got to know why did they come up with Apple, and Aaron Sorkin did the same thing, except he did it in like 1 second, and it was over, and it was way more effective.
That was okay. So for the record, the two scenes were there's the dawning realization moment of Ashton Kutcher's smug face versus the Michael Fassbender, Aaron Sorkin snappily delivered pragmatist,
Pa-pow.
Smarter than thou. Like they're so playing to archetype, those two depictions of that moment. I want to point out that my yet unproduced Bob Dylan biopic has a scene where he's writing a song called "The Era Is a Movin'," and someone's like, "I don't know, Bob, that doesn't flow. What about the times they are a changin'?" And then Bob Dylan, hopefully played by Ashton Kutcher, looks straight in the camera and goes, "Yeah, the times they are a changin'." And then there's a montage.
Right, a montage. Oh.
So let me say this about... Yeah, sorry. Talk about montages.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I just wished everything was starring Ashton Kutcher after this movie. He was just a pleasure to watch.
His overt joy at everything going on in the movie, the entire movie, Ashton Kutcher has a look on his face that says, "I'm playing Steve Jobs," but like the entire time, and it's hard to describe. I've never seen someone more conscious of the fact that they are playing a historical figure than Ashton Kutcher as Steve Jobs in Jobs, and it is never not delightful.
Oh, I'm losing it. It's so true though. You're not watching Steve Jobs. You're watching Ashton Kutcher kitchen, just rub himself all over the part. It was just hilarious. He was having such a good time. You could just tell.
Here's a note. Did you notice that his late era Steve Jobs, like round frameless glasses, were kind of like bent in the middle?
No.
So he was like, they were all fucked up. It was the only thing I could notice in the scene was that his glasses were like bent outward, sort of. So they looked like, it was like the shittiest prop work ever. And like, I just want to screen. So both movies are exactly 2 hours and 2 minutes long.
That's so true.
And they had this, it is so goddamn funny, these two movies. This is a dream of mine to screen them at the same time, like to overlap the two on each other and just have them playing at the same time, because they are such a study in contrasts. So, in both movies, we watched some of these formative relationships with Steve Wozniak, with John Sculley, the CEO of Apple, who Jobs brought in from Pepsi to help develop his vision of the brand. The Steve Jobs, Aaron Sorkin, Danny Boyle approach to those stories was to have essentially the same several figures revisit Steve Jobs in 3 different eras. And the whole Steve Jobs as a Jesus figure, which is kind of the cornerstone of most Aaron Sorkin scripts about great men making tough decisions because most people don't have the balls to make them, because men do things and stand by things, but unless they're not standing by things like their children and sort of wife. Anyways, I don't know if I liked that repetition. It's sort of at a certain point, it sort of felt like A Christmas Carol, where I'm like, oh, and now the ghost of Steve Wozniak will visit you and harangue you to be more moral. And now John Sculley, your father figure, will harangue you to accept that you are loved, even though you were adopted. And then your sort of ex-partner / mother of your maybe child / eventually actual child will ask you for money and, oh, women. And I don't know. It didn't do it for me, man. It was repetitive in a way that it just didn't feel like there were any major revelations until the last moments. And even those felt like they were a desperate, like, I felt like I was catching them out of a relative failure from Steve Jobs. The structure I thought backfired, to be honest.
I can see what you're saying. I totally agree. The ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future, that's a good comparison. But for me, it did work. I felt the stakes the whole time. I thought it was very well done, and even though it did sort of, I don't think it was, part of its success that you knew this was going to happen. But I don't think, for me, it definitely didn't serve as a detriment to the storytelling. I think each scene for me was it captured what they were supposed to be talking about. We as a story, it did focus on things, and of course we had all the background chatter, but each scene did revolve around his daughter. And I also don't think that I need to elaborate on your Jesus thing and what men should be doing, but this whole movie was essentially just saying this guy totally fucked up, and he's been wasting his life doing stuff, and he really shouldn't have done that to his daughter.
No, I liked that some of the, I hear what you're saying. I think that's where the third act was the best, because we sort of see, I think I was exhausted by the first 2/3 of the film of watching the great man do the great things despite the human toll. So when it caught up to him in the end, it started to feel more like a movie, but it felt like too little too late to salvage it as a movie I would ever want to see again. Like I can't imagine the rewatchability of this can be that strong. And Danny Boyle's direction was overbearing and florid, I thought, and I don't know, these are two movies trying to capture someone who still felt like, at best, kind of a dick. And I don't know if this comes from...
It was perfect. I thought he got that perfectly. That's what I thought. I hated this guy the whole time. I don't think he was ever really celebrating Steve Jobs. He was really just, using this man as a way to talk about a character, because I don't think this really has much to do with Steve Jobs in a way. I think he just really liked the ideas that were in there and used it as his own little way to talk about something else. But just, I mean, the whole time he treats everyone like shit. He does everything he wants to do, and he just outright dismisses the people that he should be caring about. I don't know, the scene where Lisa hugs him and asks him to live with him. That really got to me. I didn't cry or anything, but no, I mean, I was like a really scene where you really see this man who's confronted literally with the love of his child, and he just doesn't do anything about it. It was crazy. I didn't know why it was like watching this man try that hard to neglect people and then realize later what he'd been doing.
Well, let's contrast that with the scene in Jobs where all of a sudden his daughter is just living with him and it's kind of fine.
Yeah, that was weird. See, that's the thing again. This movie, they both touch on the same things, but Jobs failed as it did not talk about anything important. The whole, his daughter, and he kicks her out, and that happened, and then it goes away until, is that right? Or did I fall asleep during parts of it where they talk about Lisa again?
I think she just kind of disappears from the movie for a while, then comes back later on because he made it the right choice later on off camera. Because those kind of moments are the kind of things rightly excised from a film about Steve Jobs.
Right, and that's the thing is, whereas Jobs didn't, I mean, it sort of showed us that he was an asshole. It never really made us grapple with that. Steve Jobs was entirely about making us watch a man do absolutely nothing for his daughter. Even though she's showing all these signs that she needs his help, we watch an hour and 45 minutes of him being a complete jerk and not even realizing it. I thought that was great, the whole, at the end where, we sort of side with Steve Jobs because we can see what he can do, but at the end when Kate Winslet's character shows him that he obviously wasn't going to be chosen as Time Man of the Year, it just like makes him and us as the audience reevaluate everything this person's done and show him that there was totally other sides to these things that he didn't even bother about. He didn't even think about it. He just went and did his thing and thought that he was right.
Well, and it was satisfying to see comeuppance to a character that was uncompelling and unlikable, but you still have 2/3 of the movie about an uncompelling, unlikable person doing things that are very hard to translate excitement for this many years into us taking for granted everything he did, says the guy recording this onto a Mac right now. But, I don't
think it was comeuppance. I really don't. I think it's sort of like a older person coming of age story. It's about a person who, it's not that he gets, shown the error of his ways and he gets punished for it. He really he learned something. And I think it's taken a long time for him to get to that point where he really does see that he should have done something else with his life. And at the end, I thought that was a really nice way of doing it, showing him walk onto the stage and then just walk off again. And we don't really know what that means, but I think it's a visual gesture of the way he's going to try to do something else. So less comeuppance and more just, I don't know what the word would be, but yeah, I don't.
Well, I think learning something, that's an angle I can agree with. I see what you're saying there. It just felt like he was still being venerated no matter what. Like, I know what you're saying, where it's like, he was this guy who made a lot of mistakes, but that doesn't stop Aaron Sorkin at all from giving him snarky, clever put-downs and brilliant, pragmatic, airy, genius monologues. And, it was still all of these laudations of a guy who just sucks. And,
see, I disagree. Totally. I think that's
Pardon?
more about you expecting to you're expecting to like someone who talks like that. But I think that's the whole point. At the end, we see that he was wrong about this thing that he convinced everyone he was right about. And it just makes you realize that everything he probably did was wrong in certain ways. I don't think this movie was a celebration of his life at all. I just think it was just I don't know if I'd even go so far as to say it was a condemnation, but it certainly wasn't a celebration.
Well, I think that's a very fine line you're drawing, because I think knowing the Aaron Sorkin archetypes that this movie trafficked in so aggressively, the I'm not other people even made it into this movie. Are you fucking serious, dude? Have you watched the Sorkinisms videos? Like, this movie cleaved so closely to his depiction of exactly this kind of man that he writes about in every movie that it's so hard for me to separate
but is that
out.
Still just because he writes about a certain type of character all the time, I don't think Moneyball was the exact same story. It's actually, if people complained about the newsroom or whatever, the network or whatever that was called, like, Moneyball was about a man who abandoned his family to make something great. Steve Jobs is about a man who abandoned his family to make something great. And both of them end with the man being like, shit, I should be doing something with my daughter. And that's where we end it. We like that they do these great things, but we realize that there's the choices they make, and they could be having a fulfilling life with a person, or they could be having a fulfilling life with themselves. And all three of these characters, including Zuckerberg, have chosen to be with themselves. And that's why I love the end of The Social Network, where he's essentially spent the whole movie creating a world in which he can exist. He can't exist in the real world, and he spends the last scene of the movie refreshing, waiting for somebody to like him and accept that friend request. All these movies are about men who need this forgiveness. Even though they do great things, they're still complete failures. And I don't agree that these are showing us these great men that we should all be striving to be like, or that they're better than everyone else. I think he notices this, and he's showing that how bad they are.
Well, I agree with you. The conclusions of those films tend to punctuate the shortcomings of those characters. But I think my observation is worthy in the sense that they eventually come to that conclusion, but we're usually treated about an hour and a half prior to that of them being given all of the put downs, all of the catchphrases, all of the
Exactly.
Why does that need to be so pronounced to get to that conclusion, which is frankly not like the most groundbreaking revelation to make? It's sort of like, I'm not going to argue that observation complicates depictions of these people, but do we need to arrive at a conclusion that obvious after so endless opportunities for them to display why their superiority gives them this, godliness that if you were to watch, what I liked about Jobs in its sort of like puppy dog like idiotic depiction of Steve Jobs is that they do very much describe the tension throughout the movie, almost literally, constantly.
It is literally.
Which is childish and stupid in its bad screenwriting. But I don't know. I think that Aaron Sorkin's trying to play both sides of the same game. And I don't really know if it's worth it to let him get away with it if the movies tend to come off flatly and repetitively like they seem to.
I just think he's exploring it. I don't know if it's super complicated, but I mean it is exploring both sides, and you do have to admire someone who can accomplish these things. I mean, the way that all three of these stories are about the way they've essentially changed the face of whatever field they're in. And it's exactly that. We get to see what they've done to create this, but also see the damage that they need to do to themselves and to those around them to succeed. And I think maybe The West Wing is the only one where we really can like the main character, where President Bartlet is actually a person that we can admire, at least I think so. Even though he makes really tough choices, he does a lot of bad things, but at the end of the day, he's a good person. All the rest of these characters are terrible. I don't like any of them. I don't think Aaron Sorkin particularly likes them. I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to show us that they all came from these damaged places, like the focus on his adoption and what that meant to him and how that's affecting his life throughout. But it's not, we're not supposed to forgive him, and we're not supposed to use that as an excuse for what he does. I think he just tries to add some complexity to, rather than having Ashton Kutcher just fuck around and be all weird for 2 hours. We actually get to watch a man talk through these issues that he spends most of his life just not really looking at.
Well, you made a good point about people creating worlds for themselves, like perhaps some of the impetus behind what we perceive as genius culturally being people who cannot live in the world as it exists and are forced to create an alternative simply for themselves to live in. And that is very compelling. And I think that is worthy of exploration. And my praise goes to the part of Aaron Sorkin who recognizes that, and yet there's that observation, which is admittedly a fascinating one, and then there's the execution, where it's just the same goddamn thing. It's the same thing over and over again from Aaron Sorkin. And that observation is unfortunately hindered so heavily by the fact that you feel like you're watching Aaron Sorkin postulate, and it sounds like Aaron Sorkin postulating. Steve Jobs, as portrayed by Michael Fassbender, has so little personality other than being withering and cutting that I just didn't give a shit about what he did. So at the end, he has those revelations. It was like, I felt like finally, but not like in a good way, like finally this has some echo of being about more than exploring how withering this dude is. And I don't know. I don't know if that's worth 2 hours of screen time. I just don't.
I thought it was good. I definitely would recommend it. And while you might get a little bored if you've seen other movies by Aaron Sorkin, I don't think it's a failure in any way. Yeah, if maybe we've said this, it's maybe we're just rehashing old stuff, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of screenwriters, you get like David Mamet. I mean, pretty much every line of dialogue just sounds like David Mamet's talking. I don't mind that. I think that's fine. I think his voice is there, and he talks about this similar things a lot. But for me, it works, and I think I like him a little more than I like Sorkin, but I don't think, for me, there's anything wrong with the writer really making himself present in the screenplay.
You know, I don't want to keep harking on the inadequacies of Aaron Sorkin's screenplay for Steve Jobs, but in Jobs, they make a fat joke about Steve Wozniak, and in Steve Jobs, there was no fat joke about Steve Wozniak.
God. Yeah, I'll take that one. That is true.
In Jobs, they bravely said, hey, he's fat. Let's work that into the script.
What was the joke? I don't even remember that.
It's a good one. Buckle up, comedy lovers, for this one. But Steve Jobs, as portrayed by Ashton Kutcher, is talking about people who carry their own weight around the Apple business, and someone observes, especially Woz, he's got a lot of it, or something like that, and everyone's like, yo, fuck that dude, he's fat, and then they all high five.
That was good.
So I'm just saying, there's a contrast in the films that goes beyond simple execution and goes into that deeper level, which is, hey, you got a fat Polish guy in the movie. Oh, there's also great Polish jokes in Jobs.
See, that's how we get introduced to his character. That was fucking lovely and awful at the same time. It was just, everything felt so contrived in Jobs. And it was just like...
Jobs was like an extended episode of The Big Bang Theory.
I've never seen that show, but I totally agree.
Yeah. Let me say about Steve Jobs. I think I wanted to like it. I did not walk into it not wanting to like it. I didn't like it. I found it uncompelling. I found it somewhat flat. I found the dressing up of the basic plot arc to be unsatisfactory, and it took a long time to pay off, and I don't know if it did entirely pay off. I'm not dismissing the entire thing. It's just very hard. I'm an emotional man, Charles.
I know.
I'm an emotional man. I know when I've been touched. And that movie did not touch me.
Right. And I think that's at the end of the day.
I had to touch myself, Charles.
No, you don't. No, don't say that.
I'll touch myself when I want to.
But I think that's true. I think that's true, is essentially, all these... Criticism is an interesting line of work to not be in, where at the end of the day, it's really about what it made you feel, and as long as you are coming from a place where you understand why you feel that way, and you're not a fucking idiot and hasn't seen any movies and you just gobble down whatever you want, if it doesn't do anything for you, there's nothing else that can be said, really. I thought, for me, Kutcher's thing didn't try to do anything, and it didn't do anything. The Sorkin one had something in it, and I think it made itself a little obvious trying to get there for me. But maybe that's just, again, because we've seen his movies so many times, or the same idea throughout all of his movies, where it didn't quite work fully just because I could sense what he was trying to do. But for me, I thought it actually, it did something. And there were some scenes that I felt were really touching and did a great job of actually exploring this person rather than just trying to show us this person.
Seth Rogen didn't do a very good job.
You didn't like Seth Rogen?
I thought he was pretty Seth Rogen-y. He was the Ashton Kutcher of Steve Jobs, where it was like, I'm Seth Rogen, Seth Rogen, as Woz. Yeah.
I bought him. I thought he's fine.
I didn't get it. I didn't buy it for a second. That felt like the most acty part of the whole thing, especially next to Fassbender, who, bless his heart, I think could he could have done like a Mad TV sketch and made it look amazing. That's Fassbender. And I don't think Rogen has remotely the chops to be next to him in a movie. And unfortunately, when you're acting opposite him the entire movie, your inadequacies are pretty unavoidable. And I'm not shitting on Rogen, man. He's great as an affable, dopey guy doing a weed comedy. I love those movies. I loved The Interview. I'm excited for that new movie coming out with him and Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Andrew Mackie, where they do drugs in church. That's funny. It's funny to do drugs in church.
See, I liked him, but again, who knows why we have these different reactions. I feel like when you went into this movie, you maybe expected to get something out of it, and when Aaron Sorkin's characters are talking to you, you sort of get sick of it, and you see past it, which is totally fine. I don't blame you, but that's just sort of what I'm getting, is that you knew what you're getting into, you recognize the voice, and you don't really give a shit.
Well, you're right. I think when you're in a movie that settles into a groove that you already know the beats of, and it's very hard to get out of that. But it's not impossible, because The Social Network, between David Fincher and the soundtrack by Trent Reznor, that was a compelling, interesting movie that was much more alive and visceral and interesting and dark than this was. And I left it, and again, I know this is like the definition of a fucking movie podcast where two dicks talk about the screenwriter and the director in a movie that ostensibly will probably be enjoyed by millions. Well, actually, people did not enjoy Steve Jobs. It did not do a good job at the box office. So financially speaking, Jobs is a better film. And that's money talks.
Wait, was it? I thought it was a shit show.
No, I believe if I remember from Box Office Mojo, Jobs cost about $15 million to make, and made around $30 to $35 million back. And Steve Jobs made about $30 million to make, and to date has made less than 17 back. So that's a straight up flop. That's a bomb.
Yikes. No, I didn't think anyone was gonna like it. Honestly, it's for anyone who's just going to the movies without really doing any research, why would they see another Steve Jobs movie? It doesn't even make any sense.
It's perversely unlikable. And that's usually something I like about movies and art in general. But it's just watching this movie, I was 10 minutes in, I was like, if you don't give a big old shit about this, there's nothing to hold on to here.
Well, actually, that's speaking to something else too, is that, first of all, whatever you do not go to macrumors.com to get movie insight. It's fucking hilarious. Most of the threads are about how Michael Fassbender doesn't look like Steve Jobs, so they're not going to go see the movie. I shit you not. It's hilarious.
No. That's totally reasonable. It's why I'm not going to the Ghostbusters remake, because it's 3 chicks in the movie when the first one was dudes. And I'm not going to see a movie with fucking chicks in it when it was dudes the first time, Charles. Sorry if I love movies too much. No, you're right, though. That is, yeah. Actual techies, ugh.
And it was hilarious. People were going on and on about how, Michael Fassbender can't be it because he doesn't look anything like him. And it was just really weird. I think if this had been called something else and been about somebody else, people were like, oh my God, this is exactly like Steve Jobs. And then because he called it Steve Jobs, everyone's like, this has nothing to do with Steve Jobs. It's a hard movie to make because Sorkin obviously cares more about, making a character than he does about recreating a life but he got caught in that trap where he was making somebody who was real. So people are criticizing it for all these dumb reasons. There was an article about Steve Jobs is not the Steve Jobs I knew. Aaron Sorkin never even met the man. It's who gives a shit? That's not what this movie was trying to do. And I can sort of understand it if you're friends with him, why you'd be a little insulted. But you also have to remember that he's just, making a movie about what he likes.
I want to just take note that when you trot out the furious old man voice, it is the best part of my week.
Oh, good. I hope so.
You're right about all these frivolous criticisms. I actually did a little digging of my own and came up with what I think is a pretty on point criticism. Michael Fassbender is German. Steve Jobs wasn't German.
That's true.
Nice fuck up, Sorkin.
Out of here. I can't believe in this. I can't believe in it.
Go make a zombie White House movie. No, that I would watch. 28
what?
28 months later, and it's a movie about a zombie White House, directed by Danny Boyle.
Wait, White House or Lighthouse?
White House.
Oh, I thought it was like a lighthouse.
Yeah, Aaron Sorkin, renowned for his Lighthouse series. Actually, that'd be really funny.
It would be.
Because they're not very big buildings, so the walk and talk scenes would probably be all on that little circle around the top where the light is.
It's a circle, and they just have to walk back down. That'd be great.
Oh, I'd watch that in a heartbeat. Ooh. Get Peter Krause in that, and I'm sold.
But yeah, it was definitely a weird movie. If because you were talking about you have to be invested in this to like it, and I don't think you do. I don't give a shit about Apple. I don't give a shit about Steve Jobs, and I liked it, and I found myself enjoying the it was as you said, it was flat. I think it was a flat story, but I don't think that was a problem. I think it was, arc's overrated sometimes. Sometimes we just need a little whoop. Oh, adoption. What is that? I like those lines about his adoption, how he felt about that. Some nice lines. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that. It was not a movie, where you rejected or accepted or given away or, issues of control. And, that was an interesting exploration, but it was also a movie where, and I mean very seriously, I think you could have left that movie at any time and come back in and not really have substantively missed anything about what was going on.
No,
and that's a weird observation to make. I'm not saying it's a straight up criticism, but it felt like this thing that was happening and I could not engage with it. I had so much trouble engaging with it. And I don't know whose fault that is. I don't
think it's anyone's fault.
The slickness of the direction was an issue that I had. I thought that Danny Boyle was in full Danny Boyle in this movie, and that's not a great
Really?
thing.
That's so weird.
And,
I didn't even feel his presence at all. Like, comparing it to his other stuff, I felt he was far away. I don't think he had that same... I would agree, like, Slumdog and... I like Danny Boyle, but he's very present. And here I felt like he was definitely on the back end of things. I think Sorkin was much more present here.
Well, yes, in Two Men Displaying Erections to the Public, Aaron Sorkin's veiny member won that round. But let me say this about Boyle. I'll give him credit for one very good shot. The movie had one really good shot that I walked away with. The scene where before the final presentation, Steve Wozniak, once again, as portrayed by Jewish Seth Rogen, attempts to get Steve Jobs to show any sign of vague compassion for the people who helped create the company that has made him a multi-billionaire. And on his principles of him being Steve Jobs, he again refuses. And does this in front of, a bunch of Apple employees. And it's a very brutal exchange. It's a very public display of two old friends, the third one.
Yeah.
And he's just been agonizing over the choice of which shark to put in this presentation where they're going to attack the Pentium notebook. And there's a long shot of Sorkin. See, there we go. Of Steve Jobs on stage having yelled off his former best friend for the millionth time. And it's just him alone in this auditorium with a huge shark behind him. And that single-mindedness that he displays, much akin to the great white shark in the picture, that was a very good visual metaphor that was rendered memorably. So there's my nice thing to say about Steve Jobs by Danny Boyle and Aaron Sorkin.
I know you said you're probably never going to watch this again, but I would give it another shot. I feel like I think maybe with a fresh approach and just sort of stepping back, going back to his talking about being adopted. I think in that you have two, rather than the stupid one with Kutcher, where it really just is oh man, it's fucking bumming me out. It's it talks about control, but it also talks about perspective, and it talks about the effect it had on him, where he really cannot see the world any other way than from himself. And I think most people can't. I think this movie really does explore that selfish side of us where we have a very hard time of empathizing with somebody else and even acknowledging that another perspective exists. And his discussion, he has he always wins arguments because he cannot see someone else's point of view, even when they're right. And I think there's some very subtle ways at which we even get caught up in that. And even you sort of thought that we were supposed to love this man and admire him. I think the whole movie is watching us be swayed by his voice and then learning that a lot of it was false. And I think there's a lot of great little scenes that sort of at first blush maybe are doing more than you might be giving them credit for.
Well, to acknowledge your viewpoint would be accepting that it has some validity outside of my own, so I'm going to steer away from that. But I want to make it clear that I didn't think we were supposed to go into it loving Steve Jobs, but it's the kind of presentation of a very specific kind of great man that the screenwriter of the movie has a track record of venerating to some capacity. And I'm never suggesting that we're supposed to like him, but there's a line between this fetishizing his steely ability to vanquish foes and then somewhat obviously realizing that, oh, only a sociopathic dick would do that. When it's like, no, this dude, like, that's pretty evident from the get-go. And his eventual... I don't know. I see your observation, and I acknowledge that there are shades to the character that a much stupider director, like the person who made Jobs, would not possibly have tackled. But that doesn't mean it's a good movie, and it doesn't mean that it's a compelling portrait. And I thought that I was immensely let down by, an actor I really enjoy and a screenwriter who, at his best, can write a fuck of a movie. And this was neither of those things.
Yeah. I give it a middle of the road. Slightly emotional, not perfect, but certainly not. I mean, you have it's not an Argo. It's not, I would say Jobs was Argo and Steve Jobs was, not quite a Bronson, but more in the Bronson category of looking at a person that existed.
I think that is about as equivocal an ending as we're going to get for this episode. Now I've got to go because I'm going to go rewatch Jobs 9 more times. I will say, honestly, as my parting word in this episode, I will watch Jobs with anyone who wants to watch it.
I will
with me,
too.
Because it is an enjoyable
I think this is a great movie to watch with a lot of people because I actually got burnt out on it after about an hour and a half. I had a hard time really giving a shit for the last half hour because it is exhausting. That opening fucking 45 minutes is absolutely, like, it takes a lot out of you sitting there and laughing and just trying to take it seriously when everyone in there, especially Kitchen, is taking everything so seriously. It's good. Definitely watch it. Get some friends over. Watch it.
And on that note, Charles, it is with I think I'm happy to say, cut, print. That's a wrap on this episode of The Real Deal with me, Josh.
And Charles.
Well, you should say you're Charles,
okay.
or else they're going to be confused.
Let's cut. Again.
Okay. And I think... Okay, 1, 2, go. And that's a wrap on this week's episode of The Real Deal with me, Josh.
This is Charles. And
you know what? We'll fix it in post. I think.
And and I'm Charles. That's good.
That was good. That's a good take. We'll just edit that in. The rest of this will just sort of be like cutting room floor, probably. I don't think anyone will ever hear this footage.
I don't think so. I hope no.
That would be embarrassing.
But yeah. Okay. What do we? Yeah, that's it. I'll cut myself out. We'll just stick with the fart.